Brother John, so good to see you.
It's good to be seen. I've been out of pocket, out of the country, been busy guy for the last 6 weeks. So I actually came up doing some family dental work that's long overdue. And so I was excited when I heard about Kirtland. I've mentioned Kirtland. You've seen the pictures in my home that are part of my being involved with the original fundraising of trying to get Kirtland restored. And, that was now 25 years ago.
Oh, my goodness.
The beginning of that effort, but a lot of really cool things happened. And maybe I've mentioned a little bit about it before, but we're going to have a great discussion about a lot of really interesting and really the information that a lot of people would never know about the Kirtland era since the 1980s, when President Benson started the church's involvement once again with Kirtland.
Oh, so exciting. Hang on just one second. There, turn a little light on, might be a little bit better. So Kirtland's been near and dear to my heart as well. I've visited a couple of times. And if those that have followed my channel know that I have put a huge amount of emphasis on what took place in Kirtland, basically saying what the Lord prophesied that would be what would take place in the New Jerusalem. Actually, it took place in Kirtland. The keys restored, angelic visits, the Savior himself, all those events that took place, particularly in the Kirtland Temple. But then we have the bishop's storehouse and the school of the prophets and the up in the upper room up there, and all these amazing. In fact, I just got goosebumps, talking
Great
about
stuff.
it. So
Amazing
I'm so
stuff.
glad you reached out, because I know you have some major connections there. And incidentally, your sweater looks like the Joseph in the coat of many colors. I love it.
Well, it's funny because I've had two young gals, like 24-year-olds, go, "Hey, where'd you get that sweater? That's what people are wearing nowadays. I think they were from the 90s." And I said, "Yeah, I probably had it that
Probably.
long." But it's
Hey,
funny.
Can I show you my Trigger T-shirt here?
There you go.
I don't know if I can.
West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. It's awesome.
So I have the West Bank crossed out, and we should call it Judea and Samaria. Anyway, that's kind of a Trigger shirt. But okay, so let's talk about your connection and what's going on in Kirtland. And do you think it was a good buy for 192.5 or whatever it was million?
I'll comment on that later, but
okay.
let me just say, I was involved totally randomly with Kirtland. I had never been to Kirtland, and in the 90s, in the midst of when I decided to buy a golf business, and I had a lot of crazy things going on, and actually the golf business was in trouble. I got a phone call from a client, and he said, "I want to go to lunch with you, and I want you to meet my mission president." So we went to lunch, and I'm talking to his mission president, who had been the mission president of the Columbus mission. And then when they split Columbus and Cleveland, the mission president went to Cleveland, and that's where this friend of mine had served. And he had been involved with Carl Anderson.
Carl Anderson, I have his books.
Yeah, and Carl Anderson is, if there is a godfather, he's the godfather of Kirtland.
Absolutely.
He went there years ago, was in business, got involved with the church education system, and never could leave. I mean, he became Mr. Kirtland and has written fabulous books. If you haven't read, I think it's called The Savior in Kirtland, or I think they've changed the name a couple of times, but it's one time it was Joseph's Kirtland, but it's Carl Anderson, fantastic book, best documentation of the spiritual experiences there. Most people don't realize, Scott, that we talk a lot about Moses and the burning bush and Abraham talking to the Lord, the experiences in the Book of Mormon, obviously the New Testament experiences, but Kirtland had more verifiable, multiple witness experiences with both the Father and the Son than any other location on earth that we're aware of. And most people don't know that there were appearances of the Father and the Son that were documented in the Whitney store and documented in the Kirtland Temple. And Carl Anderson documents all this. But so years ago in the 80s, Carl Anderson, they made Cleveland a stake. Carl Anderson was the stake president. And at the stake conference, President Benson came. And again, please, everyone, don't hold me exactly to these dates or to these exact details. I'm just giving you the best of my, I just heard about the Kirtland purchase, and I was so excited because it fulfills so many amazing prophecies, prayers and fasting and efforts by so many people for the last 45 years. And so Carl Anderson was the stake president. Ezra Taft Benson was the visiting apostle. He was setting up the stake, and in the midst of the meeting, at the end of the meeting, Elder Benson at the time turned to Carl Anderson and he said, do you want me to remove the curse off of Kirtland? And Carl Anderson said, well, yes, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
If you feel that you should. And going back to Hiram Smith, I mean, when they left Kirtland, they dusted their feet off and they basically said, you're done, Kirtland. You've driven us out of here. They had all the experiences there with the Kirtland Temple. The saints were heartbroken to leave that situation. And according to my sources, which goes back to Carl Anderson, there was not a single member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Kirtland and the Kirtland city limits in the mid-1980s. Not one member. And so President Benson lifted the curse off of Kirtland, and a few years later, they built a building. I believe it was a stake center, anticipating, and there was tremendous discord between the reorganized church, which it was called at that time, and the saints sticking their nose back into Kirtland. And through a series of miracles, the Whitney store had been acquired by a church history collector from Bountiful. I can't recall his name, but he had bought the Whitney store under a miraculous dream, went and bought it. It had been turned into a tavern. It had really a crazy history, but he bought that. And then there were a couple of other parcels in the flats. They call it the Kirtland Flats, that had been acquired by private investors. Well, so they build this building in Kirtland. People start joining the church, some disaffected RLDS, other converts are joining. And then an arson burns down the stake center. And that event really triggered horrible dismay among the RLDS people and the community that became the Community of Christ. And that's like, we didn't want them here. We think we're right. We're the resented now little brother or whatever, big brother, little brother, but the one with the big stick with all the members and all the financial resources and have the ability to buy and send missionaries and do all the things that we're able to do in our church. They haven't been able to do that because as the years have gone on, they've basically, they're ordaining both genders to the priesthood. They have disavowed the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. They've really become, in my opinion, kind of an Episcopalian type of church that's kind of a watered down Protestant type of sect with a lot of really good people, really nice people who many of the older generation still revere Joseph Smith and revere their historical roots. But, obviously, their membership is very low. Their tithe-paying members is ridiculously low. And so they've been under some serious financial stress the last 30, 40 years, while our financial success as a church obviously has become successful. So they burned the building. Somebody burned the building down. That caused a bit of an outrage. That sort of healed the wounds. So they rebuilt the building, and all of a sudden things started flourishing, and there started to be members. And now I think there's 2 or 3 wards and a stake, that encompasses the nearby area. So
It's almost like the first building, the stake center, had to be sacrificed.
there you go. That's a good point.
There was a sacrifice that had to be made in order for people to go, hey, this went too far. Let's get along. Let's work together. And quite often that has to happen. There has to be a sacrifice sometimes.
Hit rock bottom, get to the day of reckoning, whatever.
Yep.
So Carl Anderson became very close to this mission president, whose name was Don Brewer. And Don Brewer, was a gung-ho guy from Salt Lake. He'd been in the grocery business. So I'm at a lunch with Don Brewer and one of his missionaries, and Don Brewer, and we exchanged pleasantries. And as a lot of people joke that I know a lot of people. Well, it ended up that we discovered that Don Brewer was friends with my dad, and that my dad used to take groceries to Don Brewer's grocery store on State Street back when they were both younger. So we hit it off. And so this older mission president shook his finger in my face and he says, "You need to help us raise the money to restore Kirtland." And I go, he says, "You're Lester Hewlett's son. I'm telling you, you need to do this." Well, my dad died when I was 30 back in 1983. And so this was like 1998 or 99. And he said, and then he went on to tell me about a dream, that he had had a dream while he was mission president, that he was praying and fasting that the church needed to reacquire the Kirtland temple. And in his dream, it became very clear, and I don't remember the details of the dream, but it was said, "Don't worry about the temple. Acquire and do your work in the flats. Stick with the flats. The temple will take care of itself when the time is right." So they had decided, they had gone to the state. Anyone who went to Kirtland before 2000, that it was essentially, for those of you like live in Salt Lake City, it was like the corner of 7th East and 21st South. It was like one of the busiest intersections. So between the Whitney store and the Johnson Inn and all of the other little buildings in the visitor center was like a major state road that was going right through the middle. In fact, they said the story was that Lawrence C. Dunn, as a general authority, almost got run over crossing the street. So it was a real problem. So what had happened was that Don Brewer and Carl Anderson had petitioned the church and said, "Hey, we want to help restore Kirtland. We've got people who will do this and people who do that and everything else." And again, and I'll take responsibility whether this is not accurate or not, but I was told that there wasn't a lot of appetite at the time among the brethren to do Kirtland, because Nauvoo had cost about 10 times more than they had originally thought that it would take for Nauvoo. And there was actually some point of discussion among some of the leaders about where's too much emphasis on historical, too much emphasis on other things. We need to do more things for the future and not worry as much about the past. Well, there happened to be a champion of historical sites whose name was Gordon B. Hinckley. and Gordon B. Hinckley didn't really care what things cost. Maybe that's unfair, but he built the conference center. I don't know if people understand how much that costs. It costs a lot. He authorized and was involved in the Nauvoo and all the other things. But President Hinckley always believed that the historical sites had great value, both as a missionary tool, but also as a membership tool to strengthen the members. So bottom line was, Don Brewer had this dream. And so basically the church says, "Hey, if you want to get it all ready for everything and jump through all the hoops and go through the environmental testing and all the things that need to be done, you go raise some money and take care of that, and then we'll talk about it." So I, getting recruited in to raise money for Kirtland, which I had never been there before, And I go back there and I have this unbelievable spiritual experience there in all the different places. And but literally it was a time when my other business was blowing up, and I was in serious difficulty in certain ways, but I just felt compelled to get involved. So my role in this was that we determined we needed to raise $10 million in about 1999, I think it was. And so we started taking people back, and we raised, 50,000 per trip, or 20,000 or 100,000 or whatever. And I brought some of my clients, and I donated, even though I was kind of on my last leg in some things. But optimistically, I thought, I want to be involved. So I helped raise some of the money, and we made a video. And the video was about this restoration project. And it ended up that we had to move power lines, because there were giant power lines between Kirtland and Cleveland, like the giant ones. So it's like you walk under it and you could hear the crackling. So it's like, the radiation had to be horrific. There was the state road went across the bridge on the river. We needed to get, according to the state, approval to reroute the road. We moved a road, and they had to redesign and to get it through the state of Ohio Department of Transportation to get approval. And then they wanted to make sure that none of the frogs or the natural habitat in the river Ribble was going to be is it the river Ribble there? Or that's in England, but there's a river, the little stream.
I can't remember.
I can't remember. Maybe I've got but they compared it to the river Ribble. But they had to do an environmental study. So it was, 500,000 for this, and 2 million for this, and 4 million, whatever. So the bill was 10 million. And so we had raised about $1 million or so. And they said, we'll do a video. And they say, who do you know that you could take this video to? And at the time, I had just previously, 3 or 4 years before, and I've since repented of, I had contributed to Mitt Romney's campaign for when he was running for senator against Ted Kennedy. And I'd actually helped financially with that. And so I thought, well, I'll take this to Bain Capital, to Mitt Romney. So I went back to Boston. I met with my old friend, Clayton Christensen, rest his soul, who died a couple of years ago from diabetes. He was a high school competitor. He and I played basketball against each other, and he was one of my first insurance clients. So
he wrote that great Missionary. He wrote that great Missionary book.
He's truly one of the finest men that I ever have known in my lifetime.
Yep.
And so I went to Clayton's office. We laughed, told old stories about high school, about me being his dysfunctional insurance person while he was this economic genius. And then I went up to Bain Capital, and Mitt Romney stood me up and sent in his sidekick, Robert Gay, Elder Robert Gay, before he was Elder Robert Gay. And so I'm talking to Bob Gay, and I'd never met Bob before, but we're the same age. We had a lot of similar people that we knew in business, but I'd never met him. And we had this wonderful conversation, and I handed him this video about Kirtland. He goes, Kirtland, he says, I was on Carl Anderson's first high council in Cleveland when I was first out of my MBA school. And I go, he says, I love Kirtland and I love Carl Anderson. He says, I'll do whatever I can to help. So my claim to fame in the restoration of Kirtland was, less than $1 million, but giving the video to Bob Gay, because Bob Gay later contributed 7 figures personally to that project. And when we were faced with the final deadline of that, and the reason I can say this is because actually President Hinckley said it at the dedication, but we were more than a couple of million short of our $10 million goal. And the church was ready to move forward on this. We had gotten the road arranged, we got the utilities arranged, the environmental studies were in, and all of a sudden it was, okay, let's restore Kirtland then. So we had the last check, which was significant, essentially was a blank check from Elder Bob that went to President Hinckley to finish what we said we would do. Then the church stepped up, put in the ashery, put in the sawmill, restored this little schoolhouse, all of those types of things. And everyone was always excited and always saying, well, when are we gonna get the temple? And Don Brewer and Carl Anderson says, all in good time, all in the Lord's time. And there was a rumor in that. So this was about 20, 25 years ago. And I think the rumor was that there was going to cost 20 or 30 million. And that sounded ridiculous at the time to get there. But I think, so what happened is, and we'll get to the Kirtland thing. So in order to get the approval to do the Kirtland flats, we had to get the city of Kirtland board of directors, their supervisors, they had to vote. And I believe there were 7 people on the city council, 7 or 9 people. And I think there was 9, and Carl had 4 yeses and 4 no's against the Mormons doing this work in Kirtland, moving the bridges, getting the power line, even though we were going to have to pay for it. And somehow Ohio's department said, if you get the money, you get this, we'll put you higher up on the list, which was miraculous in and of itself. But the church had some pretty powerful people at that point in time in Ohio. They had President Gee, who was the president of Ohio State, had Diamond McPherson, who was the CEO of Nationwide Insurance and very prominent. He was also on the board of trustees of Ohio State. So the church had some, and of course, John Huntsman had his presence at the Wharton School in Cleveland. And of course, there were lots of Latter-day Saint professionals that went through Wharton School and Procter & Gamble. And so the church had a presence, but it never had a presence in Kirtland. So the Kirtland City Council, they didn't want to take for the final vote of doing things. And I gave you the summary of the final funding, but just prior to that, the city council had to approve everything we wanted to do. And Carl Anderson, the mayor said, Carl, don't bring it up for vote. You only get one shot. And so he wasn't quite sure what to do. And then, so this is the experience that happened, and maybe some people have heard this. The chairman or a member of the city council, might have just been a member. Her son was in high school, and he was in the library at the high school in Kirtland. And on the cover of Sports Illustrated was a picture of Joe Montana and Steve Young walking when Steve Young went from Tampa Bay, went to San Francisco. Football fans would maybe remember. And then he was the backup. And then when Joe was hurt, Steve played really good. And so there was controversy. And so this cover of Sports Illustrated was basically talking about the 49ers dilemma of moving on to Steve Young from an older Joe Montana. And Steve Young had on the front page of Sports Illustrated, Kirtland Gathering of the Saints or something like that. Oh no, Kirtland City of Faith. So this kid, non-LDS, calls his mom and said, Mom, you're not going to believe it. Steve Young on the cover of Sports Illustrated has a Kirtland t-shirt on. Well, they found out that he had done a youth conference in the Cleveland State, and they had given him this Kirtland City of Faith t-shirt, and it was his favorite t-shirt that he used to wear underneath his shoulder pads and his jersey. So the city council woman was so excited about this because her son was so excited about it. She called the other council members, who called Carl Anderson, and they said, Carl, your Mormon quarterback is wearing a Kirtland shirt on the front of Sports Illustrated. Do you think we could get him to sign a picture or sign a jersey or take a picture in it that we could put up in City Hall? And Carl says, I don't know. Let me see. I don't know, Steve, but I'll see what I can do. So Carl Anderson called Neil Maxwell. Neil Maxwell obviously had Steve's phone number. Neil calls Steve and says, Steve, is there any way we could do something for the Kirtland City Council's voting on this? And is there any way we get him something? And Steve says, well, let me look at my schedule. And he came back and he said, oh my, he says, we have a Monday night football game. It's either Monday night or Saturday. It was something. It was the last game of the then existing Cleveland Browns before they moved to Baltimore and became the Ravens. So it's the last game for the Cleveland Browns against the 49ers with Steve Young. And he says, well, I'll come over to the city council and visit with them and have a little get together. So Steve, who happened to be the great grandson of Brigham Young,
yeah,
who, remember his encounter with Joseph at the Whitney store when Joseph came out and Brigham was coming up in the buggy, and he says, who are you? And I'm Brigham and I'm Joseph. And they had that really amazing prophetic exchange. Well, Steve came out, they did a little reception. He signed autographs, took pictures with the entire city council, gave them a bunch of autograph things. And the following Tuesday, they voted 9-0 to let the Mormons restore Kirtland.
What a story.
That's the rest of the story.
That's the rest of the story.
That phase of Kirtland. And so that took us over the hump. You know, Elder Gay stepped up like over the moon. Delighted to do that. And he's continued his unbelievable generosity and benevolence over a lot of church programs, humanitarian efforts and everything else. So that was the beginning of when they started restoring. And then in 2002, the construction was all to a point. They did this ashery, they put in a new visitor center. That was, so this was probably like 98, 99, and then 2002 is when the dedication was. I was invited to be, I got more credit than I deserved, but I did pass on the baton to Bob Gay. So that was my big claim to fame, and, raised probably, part of the first couple $1 million. So, so I was invited. It was a wonderful time. I had grown up and gone to high school with Elder Maxwell's family, his daughters and son. And so I was asked to give the Elder and Sister Maxwell a tour, and I think he was in pretty good health. He wasn't, I think he'd gone through his first bout, but I had I knew him since I was a kid. Whoops. And so I had a chance to visit with he and his wife. We drove around in a golf cart, showed him all the stuff. They were all overwhelmed by it. We went in the School of the Prophets with Elder Maxwell, Sister Maxwell, and there was 3 sister missionaries doing the presentation for the open house of the dedication. And one was about a 6'2" gorgeous Mongolian sister from Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, the capital city of Mongolia, a sister missionary. And she gave the sweetest, most profound, powerful testimony in the School of the Prophets that I will never forget as long as I live. And it was amazing because in the School of the Prophets, there were multiple people there who documented they saw the Savior, they saw the Father, they experienced those things in that sacred place. And when Jan and I have gone back there a couple of times to see Carl Anderson, we went on one of his tours with him, which was really a lot of fun. But one of the things that he said is that when the Father visits Earth, that part of Earth becomes like a temple, like a sanctuary, like is purified. And so that's interesting how that happens. So we were all saying and speculating, well, wouldn't it be great if we could, get the temple and everything else? Well, in 2012, the Community of Christ, now the Community of Christ, well, let me go back, because there was the meeting, and it was about, I think it was like 2000, where Lachlan Mackay, and those who've been looking at the interviews on the Kirtland acquisition, Lachlan is the apostle over historical sites and things for the Community of Christ. And Lachlan's one of the nicest guys. I had a chance to joke around and talk to him. And this was when he was the curator of the Kirtland Temple. And I used to think, how does he sit and listen to Carl Anderson give these tours all the time? And Carl's up there and people are singing the Spirit of God and bearing testimony. And I mean, I had the privilege of being in a couple of testimony meetings in the Kirtland Temple. It was unbelievable. And I had a chance to sing the Spirit of God as a solo for one of those meetings with a group of people. And it's amazing. And of course, I have such a great love for that. And but Lachlan, I used to say, well, Lachlan, how do you feel about, and Lachlan Mackay and Carl Anderson were the two. They were the bridge between the Community of Christ and Carl Anderson and our church. And I believe that Carl is now moved finally from Kirtland just this last summer due to some health issues up in northern. He's now in Bountiful, I think, with one of his children and his wife. They're just the greatest people ever. But he and Lachlan, and I used to say to Carl, what do you think Lachlan thinks? He says, well, John, he says, he's a direct descendant of David O. McCabe. He's a direct descendant of, or his ancestry is tied into David O. McKay's and direct descendant from Joseph Smith. And so he's the apostle. And in his YouTube that he just put out in the last couple of days, he talked about that he virtually lived at the Kirtland Temple for 15 years, and then he's lived at the Joseph Smith Mansion. So the two major corner pieces of this acquisition were places he lived and was the curator. So he talked about how heavy his heart was, but he felt like it was in the best interest of everyone. But that's really because of Carl Anderson cultivating with Lachlan Mackay for 40 years, 30 years, and with the Community of Christ, such a stellar reputation. And so because of that, obviously they came to terms. Do I think that 192 million is, I'm like, who else would buy it? who else would care? But, in the big scope of things, maybe if Bitcoin's going to be the currency next year, it doesn't matter what we pay for it. The way our country's going, perhaps it doesn't matter. I mean, we could subtract 20% off the value of that just for inflation for the last couple of years of this current administration. So, 192 million ain't what it used to be. But the reality is, I think it's fantastic. I'm assuming the visitor center is part of it, which has wonderful glass windows that overlook. It's a spectacular scene. And I would encourage anyone who has not been to Kirtland. Nauvoo's awesome. The Sacred Grove, of course, is second to none. But I'm telling you, Kirtland, with the Johnson home, where Joseph was dragged out of that bedroom and where he lost. And I mean, obviously very tender for you, Scott. Imagine Joseph and Emma losing those precious adopted daughter, and
that became ill. They became ill
that night because they hauled him out.
That's right.
Beat him up, and that's the place where Sidney Rignon's head was bouncing along the road. That some people may have affected his cognitive ability in the years after that. There's a lot of history in the Johnson farm, and then of course the Morley farm. You have Joseph's prophecy in a.
It's going to go everywhere
Building the size of an outhouse at girls' camp, where he said that the church would fill the entire earth, and the first high priests were ordained. So there's a lot of exciting things, and it's easy to get to Cleveland. Kirtland's only 45 minutes away. It's well worth taking your family, and it should be very interesting. I agree. I think that the church has now announced it's going to be a religious site and not a temple. But because they built a temple, I believe, in Cleveland. There is a temple, I think, in Cleveland already. But it's going to be a major, major. It just takes a few of the shackles off that we've had to now be able to utilize it effectively. And apparently, I think, if I remember right, the genealogy library in Kirtland, there now at the headquarters, is the preeminent one in the Eastern United States. I mean, it's like the best genealogical center with all the data direct from our Salt Lake sources for that. So that's exciting to have the access to that. So I think it'll be great. And, you know, I'm looking forward to going back there again and seeing how that impacts. And the other homes and things are all great. But, you know, it was just so interesting. But Carl Anderson and Don Brewer fasted and prayed for 25 years. And then they finally got this direction: stick with the flats, stick with the Whitney store, stick with the Johnson home, and not the Johnson home, but the hotel, Johnson Hotel, and the other things. And they did obediently, but I can't even imagine how elated. In fact, I'm going to call Carl later today and see how he's doing. I can't imagine how elated they are that this has finally occurred. And I believe that just like the money that went into Nauvoo and the money that went into Sacred Grove and the money that goes into temples everywhere in the world, it's all the Lord's work. So
Yeah.
I think it's fine. I just soon do that than having an extra 100 million invested in Coca-Cola stock. So I'm okay with it.
We're contributing millions.
Or contributing to the United Nations International Fund. But that reminds me, Scott, I don't know if I told you or not, but I told you maybe on the phone, but Janet and I have started our own religious movement, and I'd like to invite you and recruit you into it. While we were on our 10th anniversary cruise, I ran into Jim Ryan, the former Olympian mile runner. First,
I remember that name.
Jim Ryan. He was Mr. Mile. Seven times on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Greatest guy in the world. He's a pastor. He was a 5-time. He was voted the most conservative congressman in Congress for 5 terms. Well, Jim Ryan was speaking as a guest speaker celebrity on this cruise. And so I went on the front row, and being my shy self, I sold his wife on Cardio Miracle because Jim had fallen. He's 76 or 7. He had fallen missing a step, and he had torn his knee. And then 2 days later, favoring his knee, he fell again and tore his shoulder. So he had his right shoulder messed up and his left knee messed up. And I told him about your ankle and told him about other people who've had great success with the Cardio Miracle nitric oxide on recovering from surgery. And so he started taking it. And 2 days later, he said that his trouble breathing at night had improved. So, and I just got a text from her yesterday from Ann Ryan, but they are evangelicals of the highest order. I mean, they love the Lord. They pray over everything. Everywhere you go. We had dinner with him. And so this is a great story. So I'm having dinner with Jim Ryan, who, you know, a few years older than me, but one of my heroes. When he got tripped. He won the silver medal in Mexico. And then in Munich, when they had the murders and the slaughters of the Jews, of the people from Israel, he got tripped in the preliminary race and fell down and was the world record holder and the favorite of the gold medal. And the officials would not give him a pass into the final. They wouldn't do it. So he could have been really bitter for the rest of his life. So he's the first high schooler to run under 4 minutes. I mean, he was as a high schooler, and his story is fantastic. But the bottom line, he's a great evangelist. He's a pastor. He's a biblical scholar. He's great. So we're sitting at dinner. His daughter, who's wonderful, 45 years old, her little foster child that she's taking care of, his wife, me, and Janet. And Janet's talking with Ann Ryan, and I'm talking with Jim. And Jim finally goes to me, he says, well, now, John, he says, you're from Utah. You must be a Mormon. And I said, Jim, I'm a charismatic, born again, evangelical member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I love it. I love
And
it.
he said,
Hmm.
what was that? I said, I'm a charismatic, born again, evangelical member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He says, well, does that have something to do with the Mormon Church? I said, it's my own division of the church, because as I have examined what born again means, what evangelical means, and what charismatic means, I qualify. And our church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So since that night, Scott, I've used that a dozen times in talking to people about my faith. And I think we should make it a movement, because we allow people to take pronouns away from us. Our government has changed the name of things that are evil into things that don't sound as evil. And the churches and others have taken away that. The fact is, are we charismatic? Well, charismatic means that you believe in gifts of the Spirit. Do we believe in gifts of the Spirit? Well, I do.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Maybe some people don't, but I do. Evangelical, do we share the message of good truth? I spent a couple of years and a lifetime sharing the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And born again. So Jim said to me, he says, so John, if you're born again, when were you born again? I said, July 7th, 1970, Melbourne, Australia. And he goes, oh, well, that was the night that the Spirit took me off my knees after fervently praying about the truthfulness of the restoration of the Book of Mormon. So I have a born again date. It wasn't Yankee Stadium in 1982 between innings or when Billy Graham was speaking. Mine was on my mission when I was born again with a testimony. And then, but we had, but by then he was totally off guard, but he's just the nicest man on earth. And then he says, well, let me ask you, he says, how do you deal with Joseph Smith and the magic glasses? And I said, probably the same way you deal with Moses and the staff parting the Red Sea, or Jonah being swallowed by the whale. Mm-hmm. I said, magic glasses? I said, do you even know what the Book of Mormon is? He goes, well, and he gave me the usual answer. I said, no. I said, Jim, it's a history of Israelites fulfilling the prophecy of Genesis 49. Really? I said, fulfilling the scriptures, the covenant made with Abraham in Abraham 17. Fulfilling Isaiah chapter 29 on the marvelous work and wonder. And Ezekiel 37. So I'm throwing all these Old Testament scriptures at him and just in a nice way. And I said, I really would like to be happy to discuss it with you more. And I said, so are you and Ann Presbyterians? Or she says, well, Ann's an Anglican. And I said, oh, okay. So are you comfortable with the Nicene Creed? And he said, well, we follow the Apostle Creed. And I go, okay, well, the Apostle Creed's basically, is new lingo for, we don't follow the Nicene Creed, so we're saying we're following the Apostles' Creed, which basically affirms the Nicene Creed, but not directly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So one of the interesting, but the bottom line is this. So it enabled us to have the most wonderful fellowship. When we left, we had a prayer together, the four of us, in their cabin the night before we were getting off the ship. We're staying in touch with him. He's a huge Cardio Miracle fan, which is nice. We had an amazing experience with the medical doctor on the cruise ship. Had lost her voice from mold. 2 days, her voice was better. So we were, so evangelical, born again, Cardio Miracle, son of a gun, I guess. I don't know. But the reality is we had an amazing experience sharing our new religion, which is charismatic, born again, evangelical, Latter-day Saintism, and trying to bridge the hands. Oh, and the other thing, couple of other quick things. One, we went to the Marquise Islands. The Marquise Islands, after we were in Hawaii, went on to Tahiti. But the Marquise Islands are considered the most remote in the world. And it's where Herman Melville or whatever wrote his book about the Polynesians and everything. And so we get off, and so this is like a couple thousand people live on this island. There's like one gas station, there's a small airport, 2 grocery stores. I mean, it's really small. And so we get off late. We're kind of latecomers. We wander on, and there's like 5 taxis in the whole town. And I saw this truck, looked pretty comfortable. And so I said, Jan, let's get this taxi. So we grabbed the taxi, and the guy actually was the only guy who can speak partial English. And he had his big Polynesian, teeth of a boar and sharks and all kinds of stuff, and he's all tatted up. And I said to him, and I said, do you know where the Mormon missionaries might be? Are there Mormon missionaries on this island? I think it's called Neva Hookah or Hookah Neva or something. And he goes, Mormons? He says, you from Provo? And I said, no, we're not from Provo. We're from Salt Lake. He goes, I've been to Provo. I said, you've been to Provo? I said, yeah. And I said, can you take us to the Mormon missionaries? He says, yes, yes. So he drove us up into the hills, into this cutest little chapel, just this miniature chapel. And you'll love this as a mission president, Scott, as a reformed mission president. We pull up, and here are 2 elders, 700 miles from the mission home. 700 miles. No other missionaries. 12 o'clock, their white shirts, ties, doing the landscaping work at the ward house in Marquise Islands. Working, hauling banana branches and chopping, and all in full missionary attire. And I was saying, there is still hope for our missionaries. I was very impressed. Went over to talk to him. Small world, my world. Name was Mortensen. I go, do you happen to know Craig Mortensen? He goes, I asked where he's from. He said it was from South Jordan. I said, well, do you know Craig Mortensen? He says, that's my grandpa. He said, did you know my grandpa? I said, I knew your grandpa really well for many years. I said, didn't he pass away? He says, yes, he passed away at the beginning of COVID. And so we took pictures with the 2 missionaries, texted it to their moms, told them how great they were doing. It was magical. And we also had when we went to Oahu, I hadn't been to the church. I hadn't been to the Polynesian Cultural Center since my mission, on the way to my mission in 1970, I don't think. And so we went to the Cultural Center, and then we went over to the temple, which is spectacular. It's one of the prettiest settings ever. And ran into Elder Rasband. Elder and Sister Rasband were there speaking at the church college. I wanted to tell him, I said, well, let's call these people out, Elder Rasband. But he was there visiting the missionaries in the visitor center on his way to speaking to the student body. But so we had a chance to see that. And then we had a chance to see the cute little temple in Papati, Tahiti as well, and visit with some additional members and missionaries in all those places. So that's
awesome.
It was a great and interesting experience. But how interesting, in the smallest, most remote island of the French Polynesia, that you have 2 missionaries. And then the taxi driver told us he had joined the church 2 years ago. He was just waiting for his wife to be ready to go to the temple. And then, they're saving up to try to go, because it ends up costing him about $1,500 a piece or whatever. Yeah. So I gave him a big tip and said, hey, this will help towards your missionary fund or your temple fund. And so that was really, really special. But we had some great discussions on this new philosophy of charismatic, born-again, evangelical Latter-day Saints. It really is interesting. You're going to have to use it sometime before you leave Texas with some of those great folks, because you'll love the look on their face.
Yeah, I like that.
Because we're taking a we're taking not a page, but we're taking chapters out of their playbook. And that playbook is as much ours as it is theirs. And we
Absolutely.
need to start. We know we're supposed to be evangelical, but we all need to, if we're not born again, and then trying to live better each day and repenting as we go, after all we can do, being saved by the grace, I think it's really important that people identify their born again date and that they start acknowledging that there's a war between good and evil. It's a massive war. And if you don't believe that there aren't spiritual wars and spiritual experiences of good and evil on all sides of the coin, you're totally missing what's going on right now. And those are the testimonies. I know that Janet and I in the last 10 years have had more experiences, spiritual experiences, than I've had in my entire lifetime. And that just confirms to me the importance of holding to the restored gospel, the words of the prophet Joseph, sustaining our leaders, uplifting them, helping, serving, but still being free agents, knowing of what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to live, and not necessarily being as concerned about what the world thinks, but what our relationship to Yahweh, Jehovah, Jesus Christ, Shiloh, the Redeemer, the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace, and rejoice in that. And I think we can really link arms with our brothers and sisters of devoted Christendom if we speak up without fear or without apology for who we are and for what we've had revealed, because we're the only ones that understand the nature of God. We're the only ones that have a clear path of authority that did not go through total and complete corruption. We're the only ones that understand. Jim, Ryan also says, well, what about your baptizing for the dead? And I said, First Peter, Jim, 3:18, and read First Peter. It's in there. I said, Solomon's temple, the temples that all the way back through the Old Testament. I said, we happen to believe that everyone gets a chance, not just people who happen to be at the New York Stadium when Billy Graham was there. We think that everyone should have the chance, regardless of their age, where they fit into the chronology of the last 5,000 years. It's a blessing that's available to all, and that's why we do it. It's certainly a bad investment if you talk about building these buildings to do that, but it's because it's important. And I thought your discussion the other day when you talked about the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven was very appropriate in helping to understand that born again, born of the Spirit situation.
Very good. Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking, with this born again, the outpouring of the Spirit at the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, if we can't claim onto that and hang on to that as being born again as a church, that's our day of Pentecost. That's our day
Totally.
Where there was a huge outpouring of the Spirit, babies talking, angels surrounding the temple, people speaking in tongues, all those things. And I feel we've lost that ability to embrace those
That's a
charismatic
charismatic, that's the charismatic event of our history.
Yeah. And we should be not only acknowledge it, but be so proud of having that and look forward to living a life where that would happen again to us individually or to groups of people. I was also thinking too, the similarities between the Solomon's temple and the Kirtland temple. As near as I can tell, the Lord specifically speaks to Solomon and says, I accept your offering. I accept this temple. And almost the exact same verbiage is in I think it's Second Chronicles, where the Lord says to Solomon, I accept this temple as mine. And so we're not really privy to other temples. We hear the dedicatory prayers and things once in a while, but we don't hear the after, because it's after the dedication that the Lord accepted these two temples, both the Kirtland and Solomon's. The Kirtland temple is the first to be built in the latter days. Solomon's temple was the original temple. And the other cool thing is the site where the temple was built in Jerusalem was purchased by David from
Yeah.
Ornan the Jebusite. And the Jebusite wanted to give him the property. And David said, no, this property will be purchased. And it just reminded me, even though
There
the
you
church
go.
had purchased the Kirtland site at one time, I can't remember the full story of Joseph. It was like, there wasn't that much money. And I can't remember how he originally did it, but because of the reorganized church and the properties and how it worked out, it became theirs. But the church now has to purchase that site, and just as David had to purchase the site of I see a lot of similarities between these two temples, which to me is very significant. And I even had a thought, this is really going out on a limb, but I had a thought where the temple in Jerusalem will be rebuilt, and the Kirtland temple. Now we know it's kind of like the first shall be last and the last shall be first. So the Kirtland temple was the first temple. Perhaps it'll be, in a sense, the last temple, in the sense that for now it's going to be used to visit and people can still go there, but we don't know the future of that temple. At least I don't. And it could be very significant, because it's like what you said, where God himself plants his feet or makes his presence known, it becomes sacred. That site is as sacred as anywhere. You said the sacred grove. I think President Hinckley said, next to the sacred grove, it's the birthplace of the Savior would be the two most sacred sites. But that they're all sacred. But the Kirtland temple, 2/3 of our Doctrine and Covenants of those sacred scriptures came from the Kirtland era, came from that area.
Totally.
There's so many things that happen there. So yes, we are evangelicals, and we are charismatic.
You should be born again.
And we should be born again. And I thought of a moment on my mission where I feel like I could pinpoint that day of getting down on my knees saying, what the H am I doing here? And getting an answer, and changed my life. Hasn't been perfect, but changed my life. So
mine changed my life. Exact same thing. So that's how it all, comes down. And that's why we're so fortunate. And, Scott, that's interesting because, a lot of people, they'll try to discount the Book of Mormon, the 3 witnesses, the 8 witnesses. How about the hundreds and hundreds of witnesses of the dedication of the Kirtland Temple? I mean, journals and journals and journals, and father to son and mother to daughter. I mean, this is where, when people who are antagonists or against the restoration try to put it as a small person conspiracy. Well, how did Joseph pull off that one?
Yeah.
With the Kirtland Temple, with angels being seen by non-members, non-believers, non-whatever. They saw him on the roof. They heard him. They saw him. I mean, unbelievable things occurred there. And
the other interesting thing about it is that being the day of Pentecost. Look at the challenges that happened to the church right after that. Look at the challenges that happened to the ancient church shortly after Pentecost, which Pentecost is a Jewish feast. It's the 50 days. It's the week of Shavuot, I think they call it, or it's the It's the Feast of Shavuot, which is the Feast of Weeks, and it's the from the time of leaving Egypt. It's 50 days to where they got the law, and then they celebrate, and that's why they were. And it's one of the feasts that you go to the temple to participate in. So that's why the apostles were there at Pentecost on the southern steps of the Temple Mount. This is fairly new excavation. Within 10-15 years, they've excavated the original stairs, and underneath those stairs are dozens and dozens of mikvahs, or spiritual or cleansing bath pools. They're all excavated out. You can see them.
Wow.
Most archaeologists now and biblical scholars will say this is where Pentecost happened, was right there at the base of the southern wall from the temple, because the people were there for the Jewish feast of Shavuot. So, and then apostasy sets in because of this outpouring of Spirit. You would think it would have just the opposite effect, but Kirtland struggled after that, and the saints, and the money, and the apostasy that happened. But that's how life oftentimes works. If you've done any kind of missionary work, you know that the real amazing convert that just has a burning testimony, really after baptism, they really get challenged. Not always, but quite
often before and after.
Often before and after. So this is something we should learn from, because if we're looking forward to this outpouring of the Spirit, which we should also be prepared for the challenges that will surely come. And it will, but what it does for us is that it just hones us, it refines us, it breaks us down to where we need to be in order to receive the Savior in our lives. So it's all part of the process. And I love that part of the history of the church. Sometimes it's not as fun to read about these good brothers and some sisters that betrayed the prophet shortly after that. Really, really said hurtful things, and most of them came back. A lot of them came back, but these things we need to learn from this history, and especially from Kirtland, because there was such an outpouring and so many wonderful things that happened.
That's when I got introduced to Kirtland, that's what I was so shocked about, because I'd taught gospel doctrine classes for years, and I brushed through it all. I really had a thimbleful of appreciation for Kirtland, and we both agree is that it required that kind of miraculous for those patriarchs and their wives to be able to endure through the moves to winter quarters and all the suffering, and then the trek across the country. And and these people who they kept having to leave to Nauvoo and then have to leave again. My gosh, it sort of makes us feel, we feel like life is really an imposition if we have to move, or if we have to do something different, or change a job, or change a church calling. Here, these people, I was thinking the other day about in the St. George Temple and the new temple down there, 40 years of building the Salt Lake Temple, 40 years. And they started it when they first got to the valley. Part to me of the truthfulness of the commitment of the restoration is these people were willing to do whatever it took. Even when they had nothing, and then they left, and then they did it again, and then they left, and they did it again. And then they get to Salt Lake, and then finally probably get some apples growing or some peaches in Brigham City, and they go, "Hey, brother, you and your family, please go to Mesquite, Nevada, and to Bunkerville, and try to make that work down there. You've made Brigham City work. Now let's have take a crack at Monticello, or take a crack at, at Panguitch or wherever. So it's like, my goodness gracious, the faith of these people,
I know.
we
I know.
pale in comparison. In so
We
many.
do. We do. We can really learn from this. It's just exciting. I'm all for the purchase. I'm all for the price doesn't, I've had a few criticisms on my channel where people say, that money could be used to help the poor. You know what? The church helps the poor. We all help the poor. And what did Christ say? You'll always have the poor with
Among
you,
us.
among us. You'll always have that. So yeah, you're gonna have many opportunities to take care of the poor, but these sacred sites, I look at them as portals into heaven. I really do. And I think the money, it's all God's anyway. It's like,
Exactly.
who cares? I
Yeah.
don't. I think it's awesome. And like you say, 192 million sounds like a lot of money, which it is, but it's nothing compared to what it used to be. That used to be a lot of money. Now it's
Well,
like,
give us another 6 months. So, who knows?
who knows? And things are really, getting kind of interesting out there.
Very,
But
very interesting. So,
yeah, so we've probably gone quite a while. I don't know. I haven't looked at the
it was
time.
great. I have no idea what the time is, but it's been a great time to visit with you. Thanks
Very, very
for
good. Very good discussion.
I love the Kirtland era. It's just such it's been
Yeah.
so meaningful to me. And I would just invite all to revisit all of those Kirtland chapters, those miracles, those appearances, the journal entries, and those types of things. Because if you ever wonder if you're standing out there alone, think of the hundreds, if not thousands, of people that witnessed firsthand things that would get all of our attention in a significant way, let alone those brethren and others that actually saw the Savior. And we talk a lot in the church about Joseph F. Smith and the Salt Lake Temple, and we talk about Melvin J. Ballard's experience with the Savior in a dream. These people saw him in the middle of a discussion at the School of the Prophets, and multiple collaborations.
That's right.
Again, it all comes back to having your own personal witness. But I would just invite all of the great Palmer watchers, find a day that you felt that you became a born-again member of the Restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Love that.
And the next time somebody asks you who you are or what religion you are, consider throwing in the charismatic evangelical, born-again member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because that'll surprise people. And I think it'll open up for a very interesting gospel discussion, potentially, just because, again, we're using the language of Bible-loving, Christ-loving people, and shouldn't we use that same kind of language at times?
Exactly. They don't own it. They don't own those words.
Exactly. And I look up the definition. If you look up the definition,
exactly.
You'll see. I mean, before I told Jim Ryan that, I pulled out my phone, I looked up all three definitions, and I said, with all the confidence, without cracking a smile or a joke, I told him what I was. And he was like, wow. And literally it changed the potential tone of the discussion. And then be prepared. One of the things that I found as a missionary that's very important is be prepared with an analogy. I may have said this before, or maybe once or twice. One of the great lessons I had, I was fortunate as an 18-year-old missionary, back when 18 wasn't old enough to go. I was called at 18. My father was a mission president. I'd grown up with LeGrand Richards and his family and his kids and grandkids. LeGrand Richards was visiting our mission to interview everyone. It was towards the end of his life. He was still robust, but I spent 2 hours with LeGrand Richards alone in the mission president's kitchen. And I could ask him anything I wanted for 2 hours. And we discussed, and he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, "Johnny, this long finger. Johnny, teach those great Christians biblical truths out of their own Bible that they don't know anything about. And that's the Godhead, that's authority, that's baptism for the dead, that's the purpose of life, that's the pre-existence. Everyone out there believes in a familial relationship with their grandmother who died, or they say, well, I felt my grandma. No other religion teaches a familial relationship in the next life except for the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. No one.
Yeah.
They all say that we're all going to be playing harps and singing and angels, and that it's not a familial relationship. We'll be all brothers and sisters. We're the only ones, to my knowledge, that believe that as doctrine. And yet the world accepts that as truth, just like they accept that we probably existed before and that we're going to exist again and everything else. We have to stand up for the things we believe in that most people don't have a clue that their particular doctrinal upbringing doesn't address at all.
Perfectly said.
God bless you. Give Sue a hug
Right.
for us, and we'll look forward to seeing you when you're back in the upper.
All right.
The upper 40.
John,
See you later.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
brother. See ya. Bye-bye.